Next, we have Jacob Armstrong, and he's Chief Operations for the Department of Planning and Development Services. Wealth of knowledge here at the county. We'd love to have your update on what's going on locally.
Great. Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. A little bit of background on Senate Bill 743. SB 743 was signed into law in 2013, and it changed the way that local jurisdictions analyze transportation for development projects. The bill, which required implementation by July 1, 2020, eliminated the use of level of service, or LOS, and required the use of vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, to determine CEQA impacts as part of the environmental analysis. While LOS analyzed how roadways and intersections operate based on congestion and delay, VMT analyzes the distance and number of trips a resident or employee travels in a day. The intent of the legislation was to balance the needs of congestion management with statewide goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to encourage infill development, and to improve public health through more active transportation. As a result, mitigating transportation impacts through land development is no longer really about widening roads or signalizing intersections. It's really about reducing the number and the length of vehicle trips generated by a land development project. So the Governor's Office of Planning and Research provided technical guidance for local jurisdictions to adopt SB 743 and VMT. Lead agencies like the county have discretion to develop and adopt our own environmental thresholds for VMT, provided that such thresholds are supported by substantial evidence, or they can rely on thresholds recommended by OPR. OPR recommended that per capita or per employee, a VMT that is 15% below that of existing development may be a reasonable threshold. OPR also recommended projects that generate or attract fewer than 110 daily trips generally may be assumed to cause a less than significant transportation impact. Projects above these thresholds will have a significant impact and are required to prepare a VMT analysis. As I mentioned, individual jurisdictions can adopt local CEQA and transportation guidelines to assist project applicants and consultants to use when preparing their transportation studies. The County of San Diego adopted our guide to implement SB 743 on June 24th, 2020. So what's going on now at the county as it relates to VMT? So county staff is revisiting some of the VMT options that the county board approved back on June 24th, 2020, with the adoption of the county's transportation study guide. And we'll be providing an update on May 19th to the board on these options. This slide represents what the board previously adopted. So to go through this really quick, the board approved an unincorporated county area to establish an average VMT. The county followed OPR's recommendations for the project size screening, which is the 110 residential and the significance threshold of 15% below regional average. And so on May 19th, county staff will be presenting a comparative analysis of these options and going over this again with the board, as well as additional options for screening criteria that were not presented to the board previously with the adoption of the transportation guide. So based on this May 19th board meeting, staff will be directed to revise and update the transportation study guide and come back to the board in August for adoption, or the board may determine that to keep the guide as it's currently adopted. Also just wanted to mention that county staff are also bringing to the board towards the end of the year what we refer to as a phase 2 approach to VMT, which is looking at a programmatic or a plan level option to mitigate for VMT, such as a potential fee or a bank or exchange program, as well as potentially updating our transportation impact fee program. So with that in the background, let's get into a little bit about VMT and the implications of VMT based on these options. So to understand VMT, it really comes down to the location, geography, the size of a project, the screening, and mitigation. So let's start with mitigation, and I'll go into that really quick. So to mitigate for VMT, a project needs to basically reduce the number and or the distance of vehicle trips that are made by the residents or employees. Therefore, a typical VMT mitigation includes expansion of multimodal, transit, transportation demand strategies like encouraging van pools, bike sharing, transit subsidies, those type of things that are actually reducing the number of vehicle trips that are generated by land development. So it can be you can imagine it extremely challenging in semi-rural and rural areas to achieve any kind of real substantial reductions in VMT using these mitigations. And so while VMT can help reduce GHG and help the state reach its GHG reduction goals and targets, as a CEQA metric, it does not directly measure GHG or GHG reductions. It's only measuring vehicle miles traveled. So this really puts further emphasis on project size and where a project is located within the county to determine if a project will be screened out of VMT analysis. So now let's talk about location or geography. So county staff will be presenting to the board on May 19th a comparative analysis, as I mentioned, of geography options for implementing SB 743. A geography is based on the unincorporated area, would compare a project's VMT to the VMT average found in the unincorporated area. This is what the board previously approved, which was the unincorporated average. With the board's adoption of the county's transportation study guide, the analysis was done through the SANDAG travel demand model and has been done for most of the areas in the unincorporated county. So looking at this graph, the green represents VMT efficient areas, meaning that those areas would be screened out of VMT. So those are VMT efficient areas, which is primarily kind of on the periphery of the urban area. The yellow represents areas that may be able to mitigate based on their location to potential transit facilities and other infrastructure. The red represents non-efficient VMT areas, and the gray represents areas where there is no model data. So what does this mean for housing based on geography? The county has land use authority over roughly 35% of the unincorporated area. Shown is red, green, and yellow on the map, as I mentioned. Approximately 65% is comprised of tribal lands and national forests, etc. So based on a housing capacity comparative analysis for this unincorporated geography, about 94% of the unincorporated county that the county has land use authority over, shown above in red and yellow, is in VMT inefficient areas, while 6% shown in green are efficient areas. This equates to approximately 18,940 dwelling units that could be approved according to general plan designations. Now I'm switching and showing a different geography, which is a regional average. And so a geography based on the regional average would include the number and length of trips within the cities and the unincorporated area to determine the average VMT, which results in a lower VMT compared to the unincorporated average. This is because the threshold is 15% below the average VMT, so trip lengths in the unincorporated county would need to be 15% below this lower regional average. So what does this mean for housing? Based on housing capacity analysis for regional geography, about 99.7% of the unincorporated county, shown above in red, is in VMT inefficient areas. This equates to about 0.34%, less than 1% of the total area shown in green that is VMT efficient areas. This equates to approximately 1,108 dwelling units that could be approved. Based on the county's project tracking database going back to 2013, we were looking at what does this mean for projects that have been processed, and based on going back and looking at our data, only one proposed residential project was located in a VMT efficient area based on this regional average geography. So you can see that these decisions based on VMT and how it's implemented, there are implications. Lastly, one other geography that was proposed is looking at sub areas. And so geographic boundaries based on sub areas within unincorporated county combines both the unincorporated communities with similar trip lengths and destinations together. So in contrast to the region and unincorporated that I just showed geographies, this option does not locate more VMT efficient areas in the villages along that western urban edge of the unincorporated area. It more uniformly distributes VMT efficient areas across all the unincorporated villages. So using sub areas is really more complex and creates kind of a patchwork of screening, since different areas of the county would have varying VMT averages. But based on this geography, the average VMT using sub areas within the unincorporated county varies based on the sub area and the range. And like, as I mentioned, it could range from 29 to 64 miles. So this option locates about 74,000 acres in the unincorporated area and VMT efficient areas. Approximately 17,000 potential general plan dwelling units would have less than a significant impact and would not require a VMT analysis. So what does this mean for housing? Now kind of going directly to housing, this map that you're seeing is the general plan housing element smart growth opportunities area that was, and you can kind of see it's very similar in the smart growth areas in this map that were outlined in the VMT efficient areas. So looking at the housing needs, Sandag Arena plan allocates housing units within the region, and they do so in a manner consistent with the development patterns and Sandag Sustainable Community Strategy, which is prioritizing the reduction of VMT and GHG emissions. So Sandag's current RENA cycle 6 allocation to the unincorporated county is 6,700 housing units, 96% in the unincorporated, in the unincorporated urban areas, sorry, and about 4% in the unincorporated. The previous cycle 5, RENA cycle 5, identified about 22,412 housing units in the unincorporated county. The county general plan housing capacity is 60,748 units, about 13,000 in specific plan areas, roughly 22,000 in villages, 18,000 in semi-rural areas, and about 6,000 in rural areas. The currently adopted unincorporated VMT average that the board adopted efficiency areas allows the county to meet and exceed the current RENA cycle 6 6,700 housing units. So I just went over geography. Now let's talk project size, which is the other factor in VMT. And so an average daily trip represents the number of vehicles vehicle trips a land use will generate. So for example, one single family dwelling unit generates 10 trips. So we provided the board 2 options back in June of project size. One was the 11080T, which is what OPR recommended. And the other option was going with a little bit of a larger size threshold, which was 200, which was based on using a different trip rate, which was the Sandag trip rate versus the Institute of Traffic Engineers trip rates. And so based on those 2 options, the board decided to approve the 11080T, which again is what OPR recommended for project size. What we're bringing to the board on May 19th are a few additional options for project size screening for the board to consider. And we use different methodologies, looking at different trip generations. The most up-to-date ITE trip generation, which is the 10th edition, is a little bit different. And then we also looked at using trip length conversions, using the Sandag model, using household survey. We also looked at CEQA exemption languages. And then we also looked at tying it to kind of the metric tons of CO2 and kind of tying trip generation kind of to a de minimis kind of a factor of CO2 and come up with a project size screening. So this is new information, and the board could consider these new screening options if they choose to direct county staff to go back and update the transportation study guide. So in summary, this is a summary of the overall project screening criteria for VMT based on the current adopted guide. Many jurisdictions around the state that adopted their own guidelines did deviate from OPR's recommendations, but in summary, this is the entire screening process or determination for whether or not a VMT analysis would be required. It's basically the efficient areas, as I mentioned, the maps. It's the project size, as I mentioned, the 11080T. And then there are a few other screening criteria that are identified that can screen a project out that are listed here. One of them being 100% affordable housing.
Real quick, do you mind if I have Ryan interject what all this means to us?
Yes, I'm going to summarize that here just in 1 second if you want me to finish up or.
Sure.
Okay.
Unless Ryan, do you think it would be now the appropriate time to interject that?
Well, yeah, I think if everybody can hear me, I know we have some issues here with the microphone in the room. Jeff, can you let me know? Can you hear me all right? Jeff Ons? Can you hear me okay? Right now you can hear me? Okay. Well, Jacob, thank you so much. We have a kind of a diverse group on the phone here and in the call here today. It's not just our Government Affairs Committee, it's some of our leaders at brokerages throughout the county, as I've mentioned. But just wanted to really just give some quick background to them to let them know that the key takeaway, why we're having this conversation, and why it matters to them. First and foremost, so everyone's aware, there's been leadership change at the County Board of Supervisors. And with new leadership comes new priorities. And so that's what we're seeing as it relates to discussions taking place. In fact, this all began, I think it must have been 3 weeks ago now. Does that sound right, Jacob? Maybe.
Yeah, just fairly recently, we have 3 new board members. And so we've been directed to start revisiting this just the last month or so.
So what was going to be taking place, and it was kind of a little bit of a rush process, if I can be direct. We were given a little notice that something was going to be coming to the Board of Supervisors that would have changed how the VMT was calculated, as Jacob shared here. The staff and what had been recommended the prior year was the VMT calculations based off of county lands, which allowed for about 19,000 residential development units. What the county then decided to do, again, was bring this new calculation up before the Board of Supervisors with very little consideration. And the new calculation would allow for just that barely over 1,000 units of developable land in the county, as was shared by those maps. That's kind of the key takeaway, reducing even the potential for development from about 19,000 to a little over 1,000. So why does that matter? Well, supply issues have been the #1 issue driving housing prices and preventing people from realizing their home ownership opportunity. So that's a big concern for us. But also, if you've been part of our meetings before, you know that we began engaging in the whole housing supply issue several years ago. And Carla, if you please remind me, probably about 2016, because we saw that a few things were taking place. #1, we weren't developing new housing at the middle income level. And also, by not even meeting our RENA obligations, we knew that failed policies such as rent control would then kind of catch fire. And of course, that did take place. We fought it in National City. We were very fortunate by defeating it by 152 votes. But for everyone on the call today, I do have a summary slide that we'll just briefly talk about after this. But rent control remains a conversation and will continue to do so. So one of the reasons to bring this conversation to you is to let you know that these are the issues that we need to be weighing in on. We cannot allow the county to look at a calculation for vehicle miles traveled in a way that will unnecessarily and unneededly sacrifice development opportunities to address the housing supply crisis. Jacob, I know you don't get to weigh in on the political side of things, so I'm not going to ask you to. But for everyone on the call, yes, we saw this as a tremendous concern because not the least of which, the VMT calculation does not take into consideration individuals that are commuting all the way from Marietta, Tijuana, or anywhere outside the county. It just affects developments within the county. So the whole notion behind it is just, I think it's a flawed concept and very concerning. So that is why the Government Affairs Committee has looked at this, has weighed in. We will be going before the Board of Supervisors, and there is the potential for you as ROCs. We will probably be reaching out to you to get you engaged, to keep you educated on this, because we might be doing a red alert at some point. So with that, Jacob, I don't know if you had any closing remarks on this one.
No, I mean, the last slide I was going to show was more on the cost side of what does this mean, and cost obviously has implications for housing, but really just in summary, I encourage everybody to look into this legislation. I know it's technical, and I understand maps and project size and ADT, but I really, really encourage people to Google and research this legislation. It is a game changer for land use. It has tremendous implications for housing. And I can't emphasize that enough. And that's the reason I thought it would be a good idea to share what the county is doing, more importantly, because the new board may be changing some of this. And these changes, as you saw from those maps, have serious implications on housing capacity in the unincorporated county. And what it all boils down to at the end of the day is it means the feasibility, the environmental approval, and the capacity for housing and development based on where a project is located and its size. That is what this is about. It's about location, location, location. You guys have all heard those 3 words.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate your time.
Great, my pleasure.